What's good, y'all? It's the Demouchets REACT, and we're back with another video. Who we got today, C?
Today we're back with another American reaction. So excited about this video. If you're new to us
and we're new to you,
make sure you scroll down,
hit that subscribe button,
and turn on the post notification bell.
Because we're on the road to 200K.
And we cannot get there without you guys, alright? Join the family. Without further ado, let's get into the video.
Let's get it.
How one nation can help another and discover that this problem of foreign aid is sometimes a lot more involved than we think. What was that?
Yes, while we were having a television program, it was not for this, but we were working on it, we were discussing underdeveloped countries and the problems facing them, and naturally the problem of foreign aid came up, and there was a girl from Burma on it who said that her country needed a lot of aid and was getting a lot of aid, and the teacher, an American of course, said yes, from whom? From America. She said, no, we get aid from Israel. And the teacher looked quite baffled, which just shows that the Americans think of aid really in terms of South America.
What is your experience in Ghana?
Well, we've also been getting foreign aid from Israel. And, well, lately they've been saying there's some technicians, and, you know, in Israel, they've specialized in irrigation and all that. And, you know, recently in Accra, for example, there was a drought. So we found them very, very useful.
Oh, what about Ceylon? Where does your foreign aid come from?
Well, we get foreign aid from almost all countries. We get from this country, from Russia, from Canada, from Red China, you know, from England, and so forth. Actually, we don't care from where the aid comes, as long as it comes.
Well, we've been talking, me and I, about this problem of cooperation in countries who have a common problem. And we have actually come to the conclusion that it would be much better for countries in Africa south of the Sahara rather to try to cooperate among each other than to look too far away from their countries for cooperation. So much can be done to solve problems which we have in common, which people from overseas really can't give us as good as an aid as, for instance, say, Ghana can give to Nigeria, or South Africa can give to Rhodesia.
Well, now tell us a little bit more about that. This is interesting.
I think that's a very, very good point. Many a time we think too much that only rich countries can give foreign aid. I don't think so at all, because even a poor country may be rich in another field. Let's say in human resources, as I quoted the case of Israel, where they've specialized in irrigation and all that. And in this connection, in Africa, we've got very common problems. The problems of agriculture, for example. We've got diseases threatening both human lives and animals. And I think if we would cooperate, we would get countries coming together. For example, in West Africa, we've got what we call the West African Cocoa Research Institute. You know, cocoa is being threatened by a disease, swollen shoot. And we've got all these West African countries coming together to do research to eradicate this.
Well, you know, there's also a movement.
So, and she's about to speak about a movement. I'm interested to see what movement she's talking about. But I always did agree with people who, especially like just the idea of joining together, banding together, and helping one, you know, in each country build agriculture and developments and to be, you know, thriving. But it's more involved with politics that kind of gets me like out of the loop, because then they have more like I guess you could say intentions on why they do what they do.
The foreign powers.
Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's why when he was like, we don't care where the aid come from, I'm like, there are stipulations on all that. But yeah. But I'm always just so amazed by how well spoken they were at such young ages.
Nah, facts, facts.
Okay, so this is 1959. And the topic is the future of Africa. So this is going to be a very interesting topic.
Let's see it.
To cooperate in fairly technical problems. There is, for instance, this commission, I think, what is it called, something about technical aid in Africa south of the Sahara, through which they try to solve problems such as soil erosion, which is very, very...
Well, now, let me ask you a question. Is this new, this preoccupation of African countries with African problems?
Oh, I think definitely. I think that's one of the symptoms of the falling away of the old colonial system of government.
Well, tell us about your own experiences in school and at home as you've been growing up.
Where is she
Well, I think that we in South Africa, having both a European community or a white community who calls themselves European and an African community, have always the Europeans at least have always looked away from Africa towards the countries of our ancestry, but lately we're beginning to realize that we are very much part of a homogeneous society, and for instance people are beginning to concentrate more and more on learning native languages. They're beginning to learn languages like Sotho and Xhosa, and also we're beginning to be taught more about the history of the tribes in our country.
In your schools?
In our schools, yes.
Well, now, Nee, what about Ghana? You have a British system of education.
Yes. Well, here I must say frankly that we don't learn the other African languages. We only learn the local languages we are taught in school are those found only in the country, but not, say, languages in South Africa. Apart from that, our educational system is changing considerably, just because we've got to adapt ourselves to the changing conditions.
Well, how is it changing, Nee?
Well, for example, talking about this question of getting to know more about other countries in Africa. Before independence, we were just learning mostly British history. But now we are tending to broaden our syllabuses so that we could get to know more of the other countries of Africa. After all, Africa itself has got its own history.
What do you know about Ethiopia, for example?
Oh, well, about Ethiopia, well, I know that, I know the monarchies. It has been an independent country for a long time, but I wonder what it has achieved.
Well, Ethiopia has been an independent country for a long time, it's true. But we must not forget the fact that it's a very underdeveloped country, and it has never had any contact with the outside world. So without transportation, without communication with the outside world, you know, civilization by oneself is very difficult, so we haven't achieved very much. But we have achieved that. We have kept our feeling of patriotism. We don't want any domination from the outside world. And we have kept our feeling of independence, and we are still keeping it. But now we are getting help from the outside world. And we are giving now scholarship to other African students of independence, and we are still keeping it. But now we are getting help from the outside world. And we are giving now scholarship to other African students. There are some who have come from Ghana and from some other South African countries.
Personally, I don't entirely agree with what Nee said about foreign aid. I think it's very good for small countries to help each other. But I don't think we can afford to ignore the really rich countries like the United States and Russia. In my country, I know that we need foreign aid from Russia and America because they are the only countries that can afford to give that sort of aid. And I think this is a problem that all these economically underdeveloped countries face.
No, well, it's not a question of neglecting the rich countries. You see, we must realize that although a country may not be rich, it may specialize in a certain field. And in that case, it can be very, very useful to another country.
And then also, I think Africa has, during the past few decades, shrunk so considerably because of the expansion of the railway system and better communications between the different African countries. That has always been the big problem of cooperation in Africa. We had, for instance, much better communications with European countries than we had with other African countries. And you can see it in the newspapers. People are beginning to write more and more about what is happening in Africa. And beginning to think of that not only as something happening somewhere, but something that closely relates to their own position.
Did she say they had better communication with the European countries than their own countries in Africa?
This was during apartheid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a mindset thing.
Yeah.
It's a mindset thing.
But I do have to say, in comparison to the other students that they had as a representation of South Africa, she has been the most well-spoken, respectful.
Yeah.
And I want to say sensitive to everyone.
I'm sorry, but yet even honest, you know what I'm saying, on her stance on how she's out looking, viewing the life.
Yeah, but now I do know that Nigeria and South Africa had some type of relationship. I don't know if it was like central relationship, but I don't know. The way she's talking, it's sounding like South Africa didn't want nothing to do with the other countries or anything. It kind of sounded like they isolated themselves.
Yeah, and it
And
went
we know
straight to
that,
the Europeans for the resources.
right? And we know the history.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yes, I think that if our communication is improved in Africa, it will help us a lot. For example, look at the way how all the people are being threatened by the different diseases which are occurring in Africa, like malaria and the fly, which are really very dangerous to the animals in Africa.
Yes, and then when, Ni said just now that, when Tessa said that we can't ignore the rich countries, there's also the problem of motif. I mean, why does, for instance, the Belgians put money into the Congo? Not for the same reason that, for instance, Ghana would send mining expert or whatever they have to Nigeria. It is very much a matter of give and take when it is cooperation between countries who are really dependent on each other, whereas the colonial system, in that the interests of the country concerned are always subversive to those of the mother country.
You've established the point now that all of you, the three of you from Africa, are beginning to learn more about Africa and relinquish your ties, in a sense, with the former mother country. What do you see, if I can ask this quite frankly, what do you see as the future of Africa south of the Sahara, say in the next 20 years? What are you looking forward to?
Well, that's a very, very difficult question to answer, but in the first place, I think we must consider these political changes, because in the long run, they will have to determine the type of societies we are going to establish in the future.
You say the political changes.
The political changes.
We'll have to...
Yes, we are talking about Africa south of the Sahara. Lately, we've been hearing about Laos in Nyasaland, Rhodesia, and all those places. We must ask ourselves, what do the people want? What do they value so dearly as to even bargain it with their lives?
Well, what do you think these recent difficulties in Nyasaland and the Rhodesias, what do they mean? What is their portent for the future?
A feeling of nationalism, of course. No country wants to be dominated by another country. Every country wants to work by itself. Of course, there are many other countries in Africa who are not really ready for self-government, like Tanganyika and other countries. But we need, of course, most of the countries need help. Britain and other countries should give as much help as they can, and they should not restrain education and other things. They should give them their opportunity to get self-government.
But, yes, go ahead.
Well, you were asking what do we see in the future?
Yes.
I think that we have to face here the fact that even though we are trying to cooperate, there are in South Africa other problems, very pressing, such as, for instance, racial relations in the different countries, which can really not be solved as a whole, but in which every sovereign country has to make up its mind which path it is following. And the question that seems to face most of the countries are, what are they aiming to? And
well, Marita, excuse me, let me interrupt you just there. You've raised a very interesting point. Does this problem of race relations loom as more important than some of the problems of independence and some of the economic problems you were talking about? How important is it?
That, of course, depends on the various countries. In South Africa, for example, the question of race relations is very, very important. It is something to be solved right now.
Right now.
But what about your part of Africa?
Well, our part of Africa...
Listen, y'all know I be getting a little passionate, but I'm thinking...
Dead on the nail, see?
Yeah, it's been solved.
Yeah, but...
Shoot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We've become independent, and we've learned that independence is not an end in itself. It's not an end in itself, because we believe that although we've won the battle, we are still on the battlefield. The independence has brought us more responsibilities, and well, Nigeria will become independent next year, and I'm sure they'll encounter the same problems, because well, many a time colonial countries had to look too much to the mother countries, so that when they become independent, for the first time, they just have their teething troubles.
Well, now tell us about some of those teething troubles in Ghana, because I'm sure you've been through them in Ceylon, and I'm sure other African countries are going to have them.
Well, in Ghana's case, it was just a matter of trying to get a national outlook. Before independence, we had all these tribes with their various chiefs, and it was very, very difficult to get the chiefs to relinquish their powers to the new democratic way of life. You know, for example, a chief has virtually no power right now because he's just, let's say, he's just a president of a local council. And to take a decision, they've got to vote. And in most cases, the people may vote against his will. So that we had the trouble of trying to get the chiefs to give some of their powers away.
And it's still existing, I suppose.
Oh, well, not existing so strongly.
It's much more pressing, I think, in Nigeria than in Ghana.
Wait, in my experience, I feel that these teething troubles last much longer than the case of a human being, really, because we have had independence for 11 years, but we have so many problems connected with the problems of government and so forth. Actually, these are really big problems. For instance, the demagogue is still a very important person, and a person can get elected to office even if he is not really fit to hold that office. And I think it takes a long time to be really developed politically. But I think you'll find this problem existing in your country for a long time.
I think in your case, the question of religion had very much to do with it. Question of religion, yes.
And education, of course. I mean, it's very, very difficult to establish.
Well, on that point, you've all four got something very much in common, haven't you? Coming from countries with a very small educated elite and a very large uneducated mass. What are you doing about that?
Well, in my country, really, a person who goes to college and get his BA is a very important person. He is respected by the rest of the people. And this, I think, is very unfortunate because, really, I think it's very much important to know to do something practical than most of these things. And we don't have the thing called universal education. Education is still the monopoly of a certain class. Even though education is compulsory, most of the people, they get a very fundamental sort of education. But I think in the future we will have universal education because I feel that's a definite step forward and every country will come to that sooner or later.
How many of you feel that universal education has some relation to the political development of your country?
Oh, yes, it's very important in South Africa. We are trying to extend education as far as possible. Right now it's compulsory for people of European descent, and although it's free, it's non-compulsory for those of non-European descent. But I might mention that there's a larger percentage of Africans on school benches in South Africa than in any other part of the country. And since we are aiming at establishing different communities, it is very important for them to get as good an education as possible in order to be able to accept independence as soon as possible.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, the question of education is also very, very important when we are considering development in countries. For example, we became, well, during the first stages, there was
just 2 years ago.
2 years ago, yes. First of all, we had most of the expatriates threatening to leave the service.
Had most of what?
Expatriates, the white men who come over to work in the civil service and all that, yes. They threatened to leave the country so that everything would corrupt. And, well, of course, the government tried to get them by raising salaries and all that. And then apart from that, we must also try to, I think, adjust our educational system. At the moment, only a few people go to school. It's not that the government is trying to limit the population of literate people, but it's just a question of finance. It is very, very important.
Is it more important now for you to continue the system of education you have, educating an elite, than it would be to educate the elite less and have a chance to educate everybody? Or is that a fair question?
Well, as I say, it's a question of finance. It's very, very important.
Well, isn't that a bit an aftermath of the British educational system too? I mean, the British never tried to institute mass education. Why should they?
Oh, yes.
And I think that they were really educating people to assist in running a government, which was important to them. And they were not concerned with the education of the masses, as your government no doubt is. And
what would you do in your country right now if you could do anything you want to do? What's the most important thing to do first?
Of course, the basic aim is to use more money in education. That's more important, to get more people educated, because still we depend a lot upon foreigners. We've got all these white men coming over to run the civil service. We've got teachers coming over from Britain and all that, and they can decide at any moment to leave us.
Is that true in Ceylon?
Well, it's becoming less so, but still it's true. In really, one of the most unfortunate things about our system is that you can be, there are hundreds and hundreds of people who deserve a college education who can't get one because there's no room in the university, and it's I think very unfortunate, and that's where I think we are really far back still. I feel very strongly.
Bizu, I want to come back to you and your feeling as an African. You were saying that Ethiopia has been such a closed country with little contact with the outside. What's happening in Ethiopia today?
Well, today, our educational system is different from most of the countries. We are getting education free, although it's not compulsory. And we are learning, now we have started to learn a lot about Africa before going out to to Europe or Asia. And we have realized that education is the most important thing for our country, because as Niha said, in my country too, you'll find a lot of foreigners who are working in different kinds of offices. And we need more teachers, we need more doctors, and we need a lot of farmers and technical
I think talking about this educated elite, we must also consider one very big problem. In our countries, for example, you get people who go back to Britain to qualify as lawyers and doctors and all that. And when they come back home, they only wish to stay in the big cities and not to go out into the villages and work. That's a very, very serious problem. And in fact, we are trying to, well, in any case, most of these people go overseas with scholarships. And nowadays, if you get a scholarship from the government, you enter into a bond to serve the government for 5 years, with the result that when you qualify and you come back, the government can send you to even the remotest village.
I think it's rather tragic in that very often in Africa the people who have been working most unselfishly for bettering the masses of Africans were not the Africans themselves but Europeans who had come there. I'm thinking specifically of Dr. Schweitzer.
I gotta make sure I'm here. All right.
With the result that
Wait,
when you
before she
qualify,
cook.
I complimented her too early.
Yeah. Nah, I do agree though, man. The people that has been living there longer would do a great service to the community by going through the system and through the pipeline and being educated and everything, because they know what's going on. They know how to pour back into the community and see what people need. But then you have people that will come in and they will get educated, but it looks one-sided because of how everything was set up at this time. And when they get their education, they know exactly who they're running back to. You know what I'm saying? And then it goes to her comment that she just said. That's crazy though.
That's why as I'm listening to her, I'm thinking about when we saw the graduations and how they just went all out.
Crazy.
And their parents, because
Crazy
their
work.
parents was during this time. This was their parents' time.
What they tell us though,
What?
I need y'all to keep all the applause until
the end.
Oh, not them.
Them
Them parents was at the stage too,
Yes.
cutting up.
Yes. It just, I understand. I really understand. That's why, y'all know I be talking about other stuff. I be going off the rails. But that's why I just wish.
We'll get back into it. Okay, we'll get back into it.
Save it.
back, the government can send you to even the remotest village.
I think it's rather tragic in that very often in Africa the people who have been working most unselfishly for bettering the masses of Africans were not the Africans themselves but Europeans who had come there. I'm thinking specifically of Dr. Schweitzer.
Oh, yeah.
By her saying that they have been working less and working selfishly, it's like just overlooking the reason. It's like there's a reason, you know what I'm saying? Everything has a consequence to what goes on around you. You know what I'm saying? There's no reason, like everything has a consequence. So the fact that she's not being accountable for those type of reasons just speaks on how like almost one-sided she's speaking from, you know?
She is speaking
100%.
just
Yeah,
from
I try to give a little,
experience.
but yeah.
Her experience.
Her
Her life
yeah.
experience.
She has been the whole conversation though.
Yeah.
She's stuck on the fact that she preferred them to have more resources from the European countries.
And no mass education. That's
No
what.
mass.
That's what.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to think. I'm trying to get out of Sierra's head. Sierra's
I know
everything Sierra know, and I'm like,
Mhm.
I'm trying to put my mind into that of a leader of a country. The number one resource is the people of the country to make the whole country work.
Yeah.
You need doctors, you need lawyers, you need teachers, you need policemen, you need all of these people, right?
Yeah.
Why would only a select small group of people, a small percentage of the population, be the only population to be educated?
Doesn't make sense. And they call everyone else selfish and lazy. Because the second they come for the education, they get pushed away from it. You know, it's like, no, I have an analogy. I don't think I want to use it yet. I might save this one for the end. Keep it in my back pocket.
Keep it in back.
Okay, I keep my back pocket.
They're doing wonderful work in Lambaréné. And it has happened, I think, in that sense still, that the Europeans and the colonial powers in Africa have a tremendous responsibility, because the educational system, it doesn't matter in how far it's been adopted to the country, is still something that has been brought in
I'm
by
getting confused here. One of you says that what you need is to get rid of all the Europeans in Africa.
No.
She put words in his mouth?
The question is, it is
He said
the
something
country is in a
along
very,
those
very
lines.
dangerous position. When most of the people working in the civil service and all that are foreigners, they can decide to leave any time.
No, but the contradiction here is, sure, I realize your point, but then Rita says that it's the Europeans that have a very great responsibility.
Well, I think the point is that the time of in the whole of Africa south of the Sahara, European domination has ended to that period. I think that what is happening in Tanganyika and what is happening in Nyasaland are good examples of that, but the European in Africa still has a very important function to fulfill. Not as a European, but as an African, as a person with a superior education, because he has had superior opportunities for an education. I think he has a very big responsibility still, and should be accepted as such.
I wouldn't agree with Marita. I wouldn't agree with her point that the Europeans have more responsibilities. In Ghana, for example, we have our own responsibilities, but in the case of South Africa, it's different, because over there is the white people who've got the power. I mean, you've got all the power, so you've got to work anyway.
Yes, that is true. The position is very different in an independent country like yours. And,
Well, now talk to me a minute. I'm sorry, go ahead.
For example, in my country, when I say there are many white people who have come there and working there, that doesn't mean we are dominated by the whites. Of course, the government belongs to us, but we bring so many white people from outside because our people are not educated enough to fill up the offices. So what we need now is to educate our people and then fill up the place instead of importing white people from outside.
Well, in Asia, for instance, where the European was indispensable a decade ago, is no longer considered indispensable, because Asian countries are managing their affairs very well without any European help as such, active help, people coming in.
But wait a minute, Tisa, what about all the countries in Asia that were newly free 10 years ago and had parliamentary forms of government and have now turned to dictatorship? There have been 5 or 6 in the last year. Is that going to happen to Africa, I wonder?
Well, it depends on how, to what degree the corruption that came into those governments will be allowed to come into African
No,
governments.
I don't agree with you entirely. I think the point is the parliamentary machinery, it actually works too slow when there are huge problems, huge economic problems, when there are thousands of people starving, for instance. In such a situation, this democracy with a capital D is not that impressive. I mean, when you're really hungry, that's the difficulty.
Bread with a capital B.
Yeah, it's more important. But I'm sure that most of these countries, when the situation is better, they'll come back to democracy, because in India, for instance, there's such a tradition of democracy in all Asian countries. I mean, they love democracy.
I mean, I might just mention that even in France, they've had to have a change of constitution, and it's
Not just the new democracies that have turned to dictatorship.
I think that's something that's happening in countries that have that degree of corruption. I mean, look at Turkey 25 years ago. They had a very old independent
Well, what about
country.
Africa? Do you think you're going to go through the Asian experience with a few years of freedom And parliamentary government like you have in Ghana now, are you going to keep it?
Oh, well, I think that we'll keep it because, first of all, we still have that legacy of colonialism, as I would put it, because most of it, we all embrace democracy, and I don't think we will turn to dictatorship. But looking further into the future, I think there is a problem here because in most cases, you get people who are just not aware of their civic responsibilities. And in such a situation, things can turn up to be very much against democracy.
And the opposition has been very unscrupulous, hasn't it?
Oh, yes. You get at times members of the opposition who are just very, very unscrupulous. They just think their main aim is to overthrow the government, come hell or high water.
Well, given that as truth, and I'm sure it is, paint me a picture of Africa south of the Sahara in the next 20 years, between the time now and the time you're 40. What's going to happen?
Well, we'll have to look at individual countries, I think.
First of all, if we look on the map of Africa, most of the green and red patches which denote British or French possessions would have vanished.
Yes, all right, one point. All right, whatever.
By that, I mean there will be more independent countries. And of course, when a country becomes independent, it assumes more responsibilities and
more troubles.
More troubles perhaps, but on the whole, there will be a greater development.
May I ask a question? Is idea of a united African Republic, is it a possibility?
United African Republic. Well, we've been considering this for a long time, but I think it is physically impossible to unite the whole of Africa.
Oh, yes.
We have got a pact with Guinea now to form a nucleus of West African states. And I think we can have such associations, like associations on the type of the Commonwealth, just loose associations.
Already of Rhodesian and Nyasaland.
Yes, but they're in a little trouble this weekend.
Yes.
The one thing I'd love to get from you as we close is, what does it feel like to be young, your age, in Africa today? What difference is there between the way your father felt and the way you felt?
Well, in Ghana, a young Ghanaian at the moment thinks very much of, he looks more beyond the borders of our own country. We've started to think more about Africa as a whole. In that, in fact, lately...
Look at that. Look at young Ghana. Thinking of Africa as a whole. They still doing that. I like that. They the leaders of... I shouldn't say that, because now we're going to have people come to the comment section.
Lord, you see what you done started?
But they are the Come Back to Africa movement.
Yeah, that's what everybody pull up to.
Yes.
That is true, though.
Yeah, they started that movement, so, and it helped a lot of people come back.
Yeah.
One becomes very, very proud when he thinks that he's an African because, we believe that, as people were saying, Africa is no longer a dark continent, and in fact, throughout the whole continent, you find people trying to be free and all that. And we look upon Africa as a continent of tomorrow.
Well, I think there's something else that has come home to us very sharply, and that is really a difference between being an African and being, for instance, a European and an American. We think today, well, I am an African, and my country is having a difficult time and needs me, and that is our brand of patriotism. Whereas, for instance, in America, or say in France or in Germany, people feel, well, I am a German, I have a wonderful country with an old tradition behind it, and I need my country. See how much I get from being a German or an American.
You would say you all four share that then, your sense of responsibility now for your immediate future. Well, until next week then, I'm sorry, that's all the time we've got.
All right, y'all, we're going to stop it right there. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think this was the most we have been silent on one of these debates.
Yeah, I agree.
It was nice to see what they thought would happen in the future. Would have loved to hear more of Ethiopia and Ceylon, I believe the name is.
Yeah.
Would have loved to hear more of them. It's just always so interesting to me just hearing how vocal they are on the issues of this time. And I know that this was an exchange program, and I just would have loved to see representation from Americans a part of it, just because I feel like that would have been beneficial for that time period. Because there was issues, the same type of issues going on
Facts. Yeah, I know
in the American South as it was in South Africa. So
yeah, and I love the representation of Ethiopia, how she was speaking about the independence. And when you look at Ethiopia today, how they're built, everything they're built on. We did a video on how they built everything themselves. It's amazing, you know what I'm saying? So she has spoken highly of them, and today they're still doing highly, very developed and very, very well.
Yeah, so it's good to just hear how they thought things would play out and how things are today. That was nice to hear.
Yeah, facts.
I love these conversations. I really do. So thank you guys so much for sending this video in. We hope you guys enjoyed it with us. Be sure to subscribe. We'll see you soon.
Peace.